Can you imagine a polite, peaceful, 60-year-old black man just driving home, being pulled out of his car, insulted, drugged, just because of the color of his skin? And no one expected it. He was the former Attorney General of Mississippi. Two white police officers thought they had found the perfect prey. An old black man, driving a nice car, speaking with dignity. Little did they know that the moment they reached into their pockets, pulled out a bag of white powder, and pushed the issue beyond the limit, they would bury their own careers. The story you are about to hear will make you angry, emotional, and unforgettable. A testament to fighting to the end, no matter the cost. If you believe in justice, if you want to see the truth speak, subscribe to the channel now. The story begins. There are small mistakes that can destabilize a career, and there are mistakes that can bring down an entire system. Isaiah Walker, 64, calm, confident, former state attorney general. Now retired, he no longer works on big cases, but the charisma, the split-second analysis, the way he makes people wary when he looks into his eyes, all remain. He's just left his daughter's house in Hattiesburg, his grip steady, as if he's flipping through an old chapter he's read 100 times. Soft jazz plays in the car like a breath. Everything is strangely normal. Until he sees it, the police car hidden behind the trees, parked silently like a trap waiting to be set. Not intuition, experience. He knew he was being picked on. 3 minutes later, the red-green lights flashed. No siren. No need. People like Isaiah. They know they won't run. He turned on his signal, pulled over to the side of the road. His movements were slow, precise. His hands were on the wheel like in a black driver's manual. He wasn't shaking, just sad. Because after all those years of fighting for justice, he still had to do every move right to avoid being killed for being himself. Behind him, the patrol car door swung open. Stepping out was Lieutenant Rick Mallory, in his 40s, pot-bellied, his eyes scrutinizing an easy prey. Next to him was rookie Kyle Sanders, barely out of school, still green, still believing what they taught him in the academy. Rick stepped closer, his voice hissing through his teeth. "Nice car. Where are you from?" "Hattiesburg. I just visited my granddaughter, now back in Greenville," he replied, his voice low and warm. "Out-of-state license plate. What do you do?" Isaiah chuckled. "Retired. I used to work in law." Rick raised an eyebrow, flipped through the papers. Unusually long. "Name Isaiah Walker?" The name sounded familiar. He didn't reply. That name had appeared on thousands of indictments, large and small, over the past 30 years. But he didn't need to brag. And he knew. If Rick really knew, this conversation would be different. Rick glanced at Kyle. "You see? That's the pattern. Nice suit, clean car, out-of-state license plate. Guess what he's hiding in the trunk?" Kyle was silent. His eyes were worried. Rick took a step back, his hand lightly touching his belt. "Get out of the car, Mr. Walker. We need to check a few things." Isaiah lowered his window, his voice calm. "On what legal basis, officer?" Rick sneered. "On the basis I was asking. What's your problem?" The air was heavy. Everything around him seemed to stand still. No one shouted. No one waved their arms. But the audience felt their hearts pounding harder because of the way power was operating silently and threateningly. Isaiah opened the car door. No objection. No hurry. But each step seemed to challenge the blade at his throat. Standing opposite, he looked straight into Rick's eyes. "I will cooperate, but I know this is not for security. It's because you think I'm easy to bully." Rick lowered his voice, leaning close to Isaiah's face. "You think you're smart? Want to fight?" Isaiah didn't blink. "I don't need to fight. I just need you to follow the law." At that moment, Kyle Sanders, still sitting in the patrol car, began to sense that something was wrong. Not because the old man wasn't doing anything, but because Rick was looking for something, despite the fact that it wasn't there. Isaiah was asked to put his hands on the hood. He was searched. He was examined in every unnecessary detail. But he didn't resist. He just looked. He remembered. And prepared. Rick finished the search, brutally. Without a word, he walked around to the other side of the car, opening the passenger door without asking. A clear violation of privacy. Isaiah didn't move, but his voice was lower, more harsh. You are conducting a search without a warrant and without consent. Rick didn't respond. He began opening the glove compartment, checking the cup holder, pulling at the floor mat. Each movement had a purpose, not to find the truth, but to create it. Kyle had stepped out of the patrol car now, standing a few feet away, his hands still at his waist. He watched Rick's every move with obvious unease. It wasn't like what he'd learned in the academy. It wasn't like protect and serve. Something was wrong. Rick slammed the passenger door shut in frustration. He turned around, eyes blazing. Open the trunk. Isaiah looked at him. Cold. If you have evidence or probable cause, I will cooperate. Otherwise, please contact the court to get a search warrant. Rick's face darkened. His hand reached for the radio. And then, it happened in less than 3 seconds. Kyle stood on the side of the road, seeing it clearly. Rick leaned over the driver's seat, his hand quickly reaching into his inside pocket. A small plastic bag, very small, appeared in his hand. Then he stuffed it under Isaiah's seat, as if he had practiced the action 100 times. Kyle was stunned. His throat tightened. His heart was pounding like a drum. Isaiah from the outside clearly saw the change in the rookie's face. He didn't turn around, didn't ask. He just said softly, "Don't let your silence be a weapon against you." Rick raised his head, turned around, and held the plastic bag containing white powder high as if he had just discovered a treasure. "Well, here it is. You're carrying the goods. Isaiah Walker, you're under arrest for possession of a controlled substance." Isaiah looked straight into Rick's eyes, still not losing his composure. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Rick growled, "I don't care who you are. I am the law here." At that moment, the minivan stopped on the side of the road. A woman raised her phone to film. Another car slowly drove by. Then another. A crowd was forming, and everyone was recording. Isaiah didn't need to shout. He just spoke in a steady, clear voice. "Guys, I'm Isaiah Walker. They just planted evidence in my car. You saw it all." Kyle Sanders couldn't take it anymore. His hands clenched. His heart pounded in his chest, betraying everything he had been taught. Rick turned to Kyle and shouted, "Get out of the way, rookie. You didn't see anything. Did you hear?" But Kyle did, and Isaiah's words echoed in his head. "Don't let your silence be your weapon." Kyle stepped forward. His voice was shaky but clear. "Lieutenant, I'm sorry. I saw him put that bag under the chair." Silence. The silence was as heavy as the sky falling. Rick spun around, eyes blazing with anger. "What?" I said. "I saw you plant the evidence. Everyone saw it. There were cameras." Someone in the crowd shouted, "He's telling the truth! I got it!" Isaiah didn't smile, didn't nod. He just took a deep breath, as if preparing to enter a battle he knew would come. But now, finally, it was coming. No one was prepared for that moment. The small plastic bag, containing some unknown white powder, was held aloft by Lieutenant Rick Mallory, as if he had just found golden evidence in an important case. But in the golden light of dusk, amid the haze of dust, amid the gentle wind blowing through the pine trees, what Rick held up did not look like justice. It looked like a cheap trick. A trick that everyone there, from the woman in the minivan to the schoolboy standing on the side of the road, had just seen being made. Rick turned, his voice rising dramatically. "You are under arrest for possession of a controlled substance. Put your hands behind your back, immediately!" Isaiah Walker stood still, his feet as steady as a rock in the ocean. The wind blew gently through the buttons of his shirt, but he did not move, did not react violently, did not push back, did not even turn his head. He simply said in a strangely low voice, "You just committed a crime, in front of witnesses, in front of cameras, and in front of your own conscience." Rick chuckled. Not a happy laugh, but the reflexive kind of a man who is beginning to realize he's screwed up, but doesn't have the courage to stop. "Conscience?" he snorted. "I'm the law here, and the law says you brought the goods. That's what people will remember." Kyle Sanders hadn't moved yet. He stood behind Rick, a shadow, but no longer a shadow. From the moment he'd seen Rick sneaking a bag of white powder under the driver's seat, his view of the profession he'd just entered had begun to crack. And with every breath, the crack deepened. No one spoke for several seconds, but the atmosphere was so heavy it could have been broken with a glance. A woman in the crowd stepped forward, holding up her phone. "I got it all. It was clear from the moment he took the bag out." Rick turned, furious. "Back off! You're obstructing a law enforcement officer." "You're obstructing yourself, officer," Isaiah said. "And if I were you, I'd take my hand off my belt before I did something I couldn't take back." Kyle took a deep breath. Then, as if he'd passed through a dead-end door, he stepped forward. "Lieutenant, I'm sorry, but I saw it too. I saw it clearly when you took the bag out of your jacket and shoved it under the driver's seat." A jolt of electricity ran through the crowd. Someone exclaimed, "He's telling the truth! Oh my God, finally someone's talking!" Rick spun around. His eyes were blazing, his cheeks flushed. He was like a cornered animal. "You just killed your career, kid. I'll file a disciplinary complaint. I'll call the chief, I swear." "And I'll write a report," Kyle replied, interrupting his superior for the first time. "A full, proper report." Isaiah glanced at Kyle. Not with gratitude, nor with pity, but with the kind of look that only people who have stood in the shadows can give each other. "I see you, I understand you." At that moment, a car horn sounded in the distance. A sleek black SUV without a license plate approached. Out stepped a middle-aged woman, neatly dressed, her hair neatly tied, her face cold as steel. Lieutenant Colonel Camila Rhodes. No introduction needed. Everyone in the county knew her name. And they knew she wasn't here to clean up. She was here to cut down roots. "Who here will tell me what the hell is going on?" Rick stepped forward, trying to control his voice. "The suspect was arrested for possession of white substance. I took the evidence. Officer Sanders, he was agitated. There was a little misunderstanding." Camila interrupted, not raising her voice. "Sanders?" Kyle took a breath. His voice was still childish, but this time it wasn't shaking. "Sir, I saw Lieutenant Mallory take the bag from his person and put it in the suspect's car. I couldn't keep quiet." Camila didn't say anything for 3 seconds. She just looked straight at Rick. There wasn't anger in the look. It was more dangerous, disappointment mixed with determination. "Where's the evidence?" Rick swallowed, slowly pulled a bag of white powder from his pocket, and handed it over. Camila, wearing gloves, took it, pulled a bag of evidence from her breast pocket, opened it, put it in, zipped it, sealed it. Each movement was decisive, like someone who had worked in courtrooms for more than 20 years. "Walker?" She turned. "Are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" Isaiah nodded slightly. "I don't need medicine. I need the facts on the record, and I need protection for that young officer." Camila nodded. No smile, no polite words. "It will be complete. Mr. Sanders, go to the station, write a report, give it to me by 7 p.m. All the facts, presented truthfully. Understood?" "Understood, sir." The crowd was still silent then, but that silence was no longer fear. It was admiration. Some people shed tears. Some clenched their fists. Some turned, looked at their children, and whispered, "See, this is justice." And Rick? He stood frozen. No more shouting. No more threats. No more orders being issued. Just a man crushed by the badge he had abused. And Isaiah Walker, whom they had thought was just a polite old man in a shiny SUV, was now stepping beyond the confines of a personal incident and into the center of a seismic event. This seismic event would shake the entire system, and Rick Mallory, he had just pulled the lever that activated it. No one left immediately after the events of that afternoon. When Lieutenant Colonel Camila Rhodes left the scene with a sealed bag of evidence, when Rick Mallory was held for his initial hearing, when Kyle Sanders returned to the station to write a statement that would change his life, people stayed. The woman in the minivan turned to the man next to her and whispered, "I never saw this happen, but today I saw it." A teenage boy quietly pressed live on TikTok while his mother stood by, tears welling up in her eyes. And in that moment, when no one was asked to stay, but no one wanted to leave, a truth was born. Silence was dead, and words were alive. 2 days later, the clip of Rick Mallory planting a bag of white powder in Isaiah Walker's car had surpassed 2 million views. The headline needed no embellishment. I saw it with my own eyes. A former attorney general was framed. Within 24 hours, reporters from 3 local television stations had descended on Greenville. National news began rounding out the headline, "Former prosecutor claims police framed him, and there's proof." Isaiah didn't respond to the media right away. He declined interviews, didn't issue a statement. He didn't need to shout to be heard. He picked the moment. And when he did show up, he picked the place. A week later, on the steps of the Jackson County Courthouse, Isaiah Walker stood tall before dozens of cameras and hundreds of people who had come not to watch, but to witness. Flanking him were a civil rights lawyer and an elderly priest from the local church. But only Isaiah stepped up to the microphone. No notes, no teleprompter, no script. He began simply, "I'm not here to talk about one officer. I'm here to talk about the system that allowed him to do this for years and never stopped him." The wind blew gently. A newspaper in the hands of a spectator behind him fluttered and fell to his feet. No one moved. Everyone was glued to the ground by his every word. Police shouldn't be afraid of the cameras. If they do the right thing, the cameras will show them. But when a man in uniform trembles in front of a camera, that's not an individual problem. It's a symptom of a systemic problem. He paused, looking directly at the cluster of reporters in front of him. "My name is Isaiah Walker. I used to be the highest-ranking prosecutor in this state. I used to believe that the rule of law was the last line of defense between the people and the abuse of power. But last week, I learned a painful lesson. Sometimes justice isn't lost because bad people are too powerful. It's lost because good people are too silent." In the crowd, Kyle Sanders stood at the back, hat on, avoiding the cameras. But when Isaiah finished, he did not leave the stage. He simply said, "There is a man, very young, who chose the right thing despite the system that raised him. He is not standing in front of the microphone today, but I want you to know. His words are more powerful than titles, than badges, than threats." Everyone turned to look back. All eyes were on Kyle. For the first time in his life, the young man felt the weight and the power of speaking the truth. That night, Isaiah returned home to find more than 1,200 messages on his voicemail. Most were from people he had never met. Many left just one sentence, "Thank you." A woman from Tupelo choked up, "You spoke for my son. He is no longer here to speak." A teacher from Memphis emailed, "I showed your speech to my class today. A black student stood up and said, 'This is the first time I've seen someone who looks like my dad stand in front of a camera and not be afraid.'" Another week passed. Isaiah was invited to speak at Jackson University, before a room full of senior law students. This time he was dressed casually. White shirt, gray pants. No assistants, no big backdrop. There was just one question written in chalk on the board. "If justice is perverted, who will straighten it out?" Isaiah walked to the board, took some chalk, crossed out the word "who," and replaced it with "us." He turned and said, "No one is coming to save this system. We have to fix it ourselves. And the first tool is not law, or power, or violence. It is words, but not just any words, but words that come from experience, from vulnerability, from the courage to be pushed to the edge and not back down." The room was silent, but faith was in motion. Why is this part so important? Because this is where viewers begin to believe in the possibility of change. Outrage is the first step, but hope is why people keep watching. After his talk at this university, Isaiah did not return immediately. He sat in the empty auditorium, the lights dimmed, leaving only the chalkboard with the words "we." A student turned back, timidly approaching. "Mr. Walker, can I ask you something?" Isaiah nodded. "How do you know that your words will be heard?" "Because I feel like I keep talking, and no one is listening." Isaiah looked straight at the student. His eyes seemed to be filled with years, but they still did not lose their light. I used to feel that way too, but I learned this during 40 years as a prosecutor and 40 minutes of being pushed into the role of the victim. People don't listen to what you say the loudest. People listen to what you say the most timely, and the most truthful. What if you say it many times and no one believes you? Then keep talking. And if you see someone else talking and getting silenced, speak up for them, because silence is how they win. But words, no matter how small, if they are sincere, they ignite hope. And hope is the only thing they can't keep quiet about. The student nodded, his eyes sparkling. That day, he went home and wrote a blog post called, "When a Word Saves Faith." 3 weeks later, the post was shared more than 800,000 times. Over the next few days, Isaiah received more invitations from schools, churches, and local councils. But there was something he didn't expect. His words made people who had been invisible start talking. A nurse in Meridian posted a video about her experience being treated like a criminal by police for parking in the wrong lane. A Latino bus driver shared the time his bag was searched without a warrant. A black veteran from the suburbs recounted how he was beaten because he didn't look like the owner of the car. All of those stories ended with the same sentence. "I'm sharing this because I heard Isaiah Walker, and now I don't feel alone anymore." At a packed Shiloh Baptist church, Isaiah saw Kyle speak in public for the first time. Kyle, still in uniform, no longer sounded like a rookie. He spoke with the voice of someone who had seen the truth and chose not to turn away. "I'm not here to say I'm a hero. I just want people to know. It's the silence that ruins it all, and I refuse to be a part of it." Applause erupted from all sides. Isaiah sat in the front row, quietly. But he knew. This was no longer his story. This had become the story of many. A few days later, something else touched him even more. A 12-year-old African-American boy wearing glasses came up to ask for an autograph. When Isaiah asked his name, the boy replied, "My name is Jalen. My mom said I should write an essay about someone who inspires me. I choose you." Isaiah paused. He bent down, put his hand on Jalen's shoulder. "And do you know what inspires you?" "What?" "Kids like me, who grow up not having to fear a badge, not having to learn how to survive being pulled over, but learning how to be who they are." Jalen smiled, a childlike but strong smile. Isaiah stood up, and in that moment he knew. A generation was being reborn not just by law, but by word. At first, it was just a rustling sound behind the window near midnight. Isaiah Walker thought it was the wind, or a stray animal. He made his evening tea as usual, read the news through his black-rimmed glasses, played his old jazz playlist. But then the mailbox in the front yard was smashed. No one saw. No cameras caught it. Hours later, a brick smashed the living room window, just as Isaiah was getting off the sofa. No trace was left, just shards of glass, crushed plastic. But he knew. This was no accident. This was a message. Kyle Sanders got the message too. His front tires were slashed with a knife. In the rearview mirror, a note was scrawled in red ink. "Be careful with your honesty." Another morning, his uniform hung in the locker room, cut in half. And in his locker drawer, he found a dead rat lying flat, eyes wide open. No one saw who did it. No cameras, no evidence. But his colleagues stopped looking him in the eye. At police station meetings, silence began to grow like a poisonous mushroom. Cold nods, unanswered good mornings. A sergeant who had trained Kyle now turned away whenever he entered the meeting room. Another time, when Kyle was sitting alone in the cafeteria, a group of officers pulled up chairs, sat down, and then, upon seeing him, stood up and walked away. Kyle didn't tell his parents, didn't tell anyone except Lieutenant Colonel Camila Rhodes. She listened, then said only, "This is where you learn something that training school doesn't teach. Isolation is the oldest strategy for killing an inner voice. But if you stay silent now, what you've stood for will die." At the same time, Isaiah received a letter with no return address. The paper was neatly folded, clean, typed in an old-fashioned font. There was no salutation, no name. Just this sentence. "We know what you're doing, and we know when you're home alone." Isaiah didn't call the police. He didn't trust them all. But he called an old friend, a former federal agent. He helped him set up a standalone camera system, set up alarms, and hire a private security guard to keep watch. Isaiah's daughter, after hearing her father describe what was happening, sobbed on the phone. "Dad, stop it! You've done enough!" Isaiah was silent. Then he said, "If you see anyone threatening me for telling the truth, then it's time for the truth to be told louder." And then the darkness played a higher trick. An anonymous extremist blog circulated a mugshot of Isaiah from 1987. The image was poorly photoshopped, but shared thousands of times with the caption, "Is this the guy you trust?" Conservative police forums began to spread rumors. Isaiah set up Rick Mallory for personal revenge. Kyle was called a badge seller, paid by liberals to lie. A far-right YouTube channel even created a 20-minute video recreating the traffic stop. But with the roles reversed, Isaiah became the criminal, while Rick Mallory became the victim of the media. The video garnered more than 600,000 views in just 3 days, but all that pushback had an unintended result. The community became more vigilant, united, and resolute. A group of teachers organized a replay of the truth at the local public school, where students watched the original video of the incident and compared it to the fabricated videos. A black church in Biloxi held a Resist the Darkness vigil for Isaiah and Kyle. And at Jackson University, students started a Name It campaign, demanding that civil rights and abuse of power be included in the regular curriculum. But amid the wake-up call, Isaiah did not sleep well. His dreams were now interrupted by the sound of imaginary glass breaking. By memories he tried to keep only inside himself. The bodies he had defended, the people he had failed to save, the cases he had thought he had done right. One night he stood alone in his backyard, looking out at the still Mississippi sky. Then he whispered, "If the darkness wants to drag me back, I will be the one to bring the light." But there are shadows that leave no trace, no warning. They simply appear silently and last long enough for people to forget that the light ever existed. One evening, as Isaiah walked out of a talk at the community center, he found the trunk of his car open. Nothing had been taken, but his belongings had been strangely shuffled. Private letters opened, folders pulled out of his briefcase, then put back in as if someone wanted him to know that they had been there, had looked into his life. Isaiah was no longer surprised. He was no longer afraid in the usual way. He was just increasingly aware. This time, the enemy was not just a bad cop. It was a system that was starting to defend itself. At the police station, Lieutenant Colonel Camila Rhodes called an emergency meeting. She knew something was wrong when Rick Mallory's disciplinary records suddenly disappeared from the internal server, a day after she filed a release request with the plaintiff's attorney. Not only that, Mallory's 3 old civil complaints were also missing from the paper files in the archives room, and more importantly, the person in charge of the records room, Lieutenant Ken Vickers, a longtime friend of Rick's, had taken a 2-week leave of absence, and, coincidentally, lost his phone. Camila banged on the table, eyeing each of the bowed officers. "If any of you are trying to clean up after someone who has dishonored this badge, know this: I'm not cleaning up after you." She ordered the entire administrative team suspended from internal access and ordered a 3-year backup of the data sent straight to the State Inspector General's office. And then Kyle's family happened. One afternoon, his mother called in a panic. She found the door latch broken, nothing missing. But Kyle's room had been ransacked, and on his desk, someone had written in red pen on an old test paper, "Honesty will not feed you." Kyle drove home that night. On the way, he noticed an unmarked brown pickup following him for 12 miles. He changed lanes. It followed. He turned abruptly into a gas station. It stopped far away, lights off. When he turned around, it was gone. Kyle didn't sleep that night. He sat on the couch, one hand on his baton, the other cradling his badge. No more pride, only responsibility and danger. Isaiah began to feel isolated too, even though he was more loved than ever. An old friend from the legal profession called, his voice trembling. There are people who don't want you to continue, Isaiah. I hear some of the people you used to support are coming back. Not because of Mallory, but because you're opening yourself too far into the system. Isaiah sighed. He wasn't surprised, but something bothered him. How many more people, like Kyle, like me, have to suffer in silence because the people who shook their hands have turned against them? That night he wrote in his notebook, "They attack because they're afraid, and that fear is proof that they're on the right track." A week later, on national television, Rick Mallory appeared in public for the first time. He was wearing a white shirt, his hair combed back, his eyes slightly red, and his face no longer fierce. The host asked, "Do you regret it?" Mallory looked into the camera and said, "I followed orders. I was taught to smell danger. And when I saw a black man driving a luxury SUV, my instinct told me something was wrong." The studio fell silent. Isaiah watched the interview on his tablet. He didn't get angry. He quietly saved the video to his court files folder, then closed it. "Intuition?" he whispered. "Or is it instinctual bias?" A few days later, a photo arrived in Isaiah's inbox. No envelope, no notes. A photo of him and his granddaughter at the park last weekend. Clear. Zoomed in. In the bottom corner, scrawled in red pen, "Everyone has a weakness." Isaiah said nothing. He just stood at the kitchen table for a long time, then firmly dialed the FBI number. The game has gone beyond warning. That night, at an unannounced press conference, Isaiah stepped up to the podium, looking directly at the camera. "If I, the man who once held the highest position in the state's judiciary, can be threatened, smeared, stalked, how many people are being bullied in the shadows and no one knows? I'm not speaking out to complain. I'm speaking out to warn. We're not dealing with a few bad actors. We're dealing with a culture that believes power is a weapon to suppress the truth. And I swear I won't let them win." 3 days after Isaiah's press conference, an image began circulating on social media. A photo of Isaiah standing tall at a podium. Behind him, 2 rows of microphones from major news outlets, the glare of his graying hair, but his face as hard as stone. Below the photo was a caption someone had edited. "He didn't yell. He just told the truth. And that was enough." The photo was shared tens of thousands of times in 48 hours. But what was even more strange was that it wasn't just on pro-justice pages. It was in parenting groups, on teacher forums, on cooking, sports, and music accounts. A white suburban homemaker wrote, "I've never been interested in politics, but yesterday my son asked me, 'Mom, is it true that people get arrested because they look different?' I didn't know how to answer. Then I saw him, and I knew. It's time for me to speak up." That buzz began to turn into action. At a high school in Tupelo, seniors organized a Black Day. All students, regardless of race, wore black shirts that read, "We are not silent anymore." A group of law students at the University of Mississippi founded Light of Law, an organization that provides free legal advice to people who have been wronged during traffic stops. At Mount Zion Church, where Isaiah once preached, the pastor held a special prayer vigil. Each person brought the name of a loved one who had been wronged or discriminated against. The name tags were placed in a glass jar, called the Justice Jar. The jar overflowed in just 90 minutes, and then something unexpected happened. Other officers began talking. A veteran patrolman from Hattiesburg wrote anonymously to the press, "I once had a supervisor tear up a black man's statement and tell me to rewrite it to fit their report. When I asked why, he just laughed and said, 'That's how we keep order.' I kept quiet for 6 years, but thanks to Isaiah, I can't do that anymore." An Asian officer in Natchez emailed Lieutenant Colonel Rhodes directly, asking for a private meeting. During the conversation, he produced a hard drive containing backups of body cam footage that had been deleted from the system, including more than 20 instances of traffic stops without clear cause. Camilla said nothing, just took the hard drive, squeezed the officer's hand, and said, "You just saved more than your own career. You saved our honor." Kyle Sanders, once a pariah, became a role model for police students at internal affairs meetings. Despite the cold stares and the whispers, he noticed something had changed. Younger people were starting to approach him. One afternoon, a rookie trainee pulled up a chair at Kyle's lunch table and whispered, "I saw the original video. I thought it wasn't real, until you told me." Kyle looked at the young man. His face was the same as his own a year ago, still believing in the honor of the uniform, and yet to taste betrayal. He simply replied, "Hold on to what you're feeling, because one day you're going to have to choose." Isaiah accepted an invitation to speak before the Mississippi House of Representatives. No microphone, no slogan. He carried a racially discriminatory traffic stop chart compiled by the student group Light of Law. As he entered the chamber, the delegates fell silent, because Isaiah did not enter alone. He was accompanied by 18 people who had been wronged from different districts, from all walks of life. Truck drivers, elementary school teachers, veterans, grocery store clerks. They did not shout. They did not hold signs. They just stood there, quietly, present. Isaiah began his speech with a single sentence. "I do not stand here to beg for mercy. I stand here to ask one thing, that you look them in the eye and call what happened by its name." And then he pointed to each person, each story, narrated in a quiet, clear voice. One delegate shed tears, another left his seat and walked out of the room, but most stayed and listened. After the speech, the press used the word shocking. But Isaiah just went home, sat by the window with his usual cup of tea. His granddaughter asked, "Grandpa, people called you a hero. Do you see yourself as a superhero?" He chuckled and shook his head. "No, you're just an old man who won't shut up." The little girl nodded. And in those childlike eyes, Isaiah saw what he had always longed for. A generation that would no longer have to carry the burden that he had carried all his life. It began with an old file found in the basement of the Wilkinson County Sheriff's Office, where fluorescent lights flickered and dust lay thick as wartime carbon paper. A young officer named Devin Lee, who had heard Isaiah speak in college, happened to be sent down to check the records. And there, amid the rotting pile, he found a document labeled "Internal, not for public view." He opened it. His eyes froze. Inside was a list of off-the-books individuals from 2012 to 2021. Names with no criminal records, no reason for investigation, but only one thing in common. Most were Black or Latino or immigrants or had spoken out against abuses of power. Devin reported it. But less than 12 hours later, the file had disappeared from the archives. When he returned to the basement with his boss, the file cabinet was locked, and his access code had been revoked. At the same time, the Light of Law students discovered a strange pattern of data. 43 traffic stops over 4 years had the same officer reporting them. Lieutenant Halverson, the man Rick Mallory had once praised for cleaning up after the scenes. None of the 43 had body cam video, all had the same note. Camera malfunctioned. And even stranger, nearly half of the people stopped had not received an official report, only an unsigned, handwritten internal memo. Isaiah was informed of these findings one windy afternoon. He sat silently. Then he flipped open his notebook and scribbled a line. "This is no longer a mistake. This is the plan." Camilla Rhodes knew this all along. But now she had evidence, and she didn't wait any longer. She filed a motion with the State Inspector General for a full investigation into the internal reporting systems of the police forces of 4 neighboring counties. At the same time, she announced to the public, "We have reason to believe that a network of internal data manipulation has existed for the past 10 years, designed to protect serious violations of human rights and justice." And so the earthquake began. Within 72 hours, the press was filled with headlines. Fake records, vulnerabilities in Mississippi's law enforcement system, blacklist of off-system trackers revealed, a generation of camera blur, now the light is shining on every frame. Rick Mallory, from his pre-trial detention facility, asked his attorney to refute the media. But all efforts were drowned out by the flood of facts. An independent auditor found that 23% of internal reports from the past 6 years at 5 police stations showed signs of improper editing. Many of the entries were rewritten after Isaiah went public with his story. A former IT manager, whose identity was protected, testified, "I was once ordered to reformat the server system because it was overloaded. But in reality, I was told to delete log folders related to unusual camera disconnections." And then the biggest bang came from the state legislature itself. A former state attorney general, who worked closely with Isaiah while he was in office, came forward to provide more than 300 pages of confidential documents, including emails between senior police officials and prosecutors in which they agreed to go easy on officers accused of abuse, internal meetings where they discussed how to delay internal investigations until public opinion cooled, an internal state of the public dashboard based on the virality of the #JusticeForIsaiah hashtag to decide whether to proceed internally. Isaiah did not back down. Instead, he became a communications strategist, working with a team of lawyers and students to analyze documents and create a systemic misconduct map, a statewide map colored by the level of civilian culture toxicity. When he unveiled the map on television, he pointed to each area and said, "If you live in a red zone, know that you are not safe because you are breaking the law, but because the people who enforce the law have lost respect for it." Isaiah sat in a makeshift office on the second floor of a small community center in Greenville, the dim fluorescent lights reflecting off a desk covered with papers, diagrams, and newspaper clippings. Before him was a map of Mississippi, no longer the place he once called his peaceful home, but a mirror that held up the true face of a system he had once served. Every red spot on this map was a stab in the heart of justice. Every leaked email was a slap in the face to the ideals he had sworn allegiance to. And worse, he had shaken hands with those same people. He didn't tell anyone, but he couldn't sleep that night, not out of fear, out of the feeling that he had to start over from scratch. Camilla Rhodes, who thought she had seen it all in her 27-year career with a gun, stood silently in the conference room as she received an email from the state's investigation team. She read slowly, line by line, then closed her computer, leaned her hands on the desk, and closed her eyes as if to hold on to her remaining consciousness. Then she opened her eyes and said to the advisory group, "If any of you still believe that this is a few bad apples spoiling the barrel, then I suggest you turn in your badges today." No one left the room, no one argued, because by then, the truth had become common language. News of the tampered database spread across the evening news. Not just liberal outlets, but conservative outlets that had previously dismissed Isaiah's case as political hype. A veteran news anchor went on air and said, "I thought this was an isolated incident, but when I looked at the evidence, the complicity, I had to admit, we've been silent for too long." The state could not ignore it. An emergency hearing was held before the state legislature with the district attorney, representatives of the relevant county police departments, and most notably, Isaiah Walker. The hearing was televised. Isaiah sat in front of dozens of cameras, his head bowed slightly, his hands clasped together, the microphone just inches away. He didn't get angry. He didn't criticize. He just told. Case by case, fact by fact. And every disappointed look from the victims he'd seen in 30 years. A congressman asked him, "Sir Walker, what do you want us to do?" He raised his head, his eyes staring straight ahead. "I don't want anything. I'm asking. And I'm asking for something simple. You stop protecting the system and start protecting the people." Immediately after the hearing, "Exposeth the System" became the top trending hashtag in the state. Students protested in front of City Hall. Parents demanded an audit of school police. Churches held Bible studies with the theme, "Justice is Organized Love." A group of retired officers announced the formation of the Right Law Alliance, declaring, "We are not betraying the department. We are saving it from the very people who destroyed it. But the system was not silent. An emergency internal meeting at the Stone County Sheriff's Office was held in the dark, without minutes, without phones allowed. At it, a captain blurted out, "If we let an old retired guy and a rookie destroy the reputation of our force, next time they will write a law that will make us afraid to get out of our cars." A young officer stood up and left the room. He said nothing. But the next day, he submitted a transfer request and attached a report of the meeting. Isaiah was invited back to speak at a statewide conference on law enforcement reform. He took the stage, wearing his old suit for the first time since retiring. He looked out at the room, filled with former cops, prosecutors, judges, and those who had been hurt by them. He did not give a speech. He simply said, "I have not come to expose anyone. I have come to repeat the oath you took in court, to do justice to all, without favoritism, without fear. If that oath has any meaning, now is the time to keep it." No one knows exactly who laid the first rock on the lawn in front of the Mississippi State Capitol. It was just a small rock, gray and white, nothing special. Handwritten in black ink on it were the words, "Justice does not require perfection. It only requires beginning." The next day there was another, then 10, then hundreds. By the end of the week, a circle of thousands of small rocks had formed, each bearing a message, a pain, a vow. They did not come from activists. They did not come from politicians. They came from ordinary people. Mothers, grandfathers, students, truck drivers, elementary school teachers. That was the first miracle, when silence spoke. In schools, students began asking more questions. "Teacher, if I get pulled over for no reason, what should I do?" "Teacher, who is Isaiah Walker? My dad says he's not afraid of anyone." A Biloxi elementary school teacher recalled that during a civics class, a fourth-grade student said, "I want to be a cop, but the kind that doesn't pick oranges." When she asked again, the boy just smiled, "Because I saw Uncle Kyle crying on TV, and I didn't give up." Kyle Sanders was invited to speak in a middle school classroom. At first, he declined. He told Isaiah, "I'm not a hero." Isaiah just nodded. "That's why I need to talk to the kids." The talk took place in the school library, which was packed with more than 80 students. Kyle was in plain clothes. No big talk. He simply said, "There were times when I thought I would be expelled, forgotten, called a traitor. But it turns out, when I told the truth, I didn't lose anything. I just knew who I was." When the talk ended, a student approached and timidly asked, "Kyle, are you scared?" Kyle leaned down and looked the boy straight in the eye. "Scared. But fear isn't a bad thing. The bad thing is letting fear decide who you become." Isaiah didn't rest. Instead of going around giving speeches, he decided to do something more low-key, organizing a series of seminars on law and courage, inviting young lawyers, newly minted prosecutors, and senior criminology students. There, he didn't preach. He posed the question. If a senior officer asked you to change a record for internal reasons, what would you do? If a defendant says he or she is being framed, how far will you go? If you find a mistake in the database, will you keep quiet to protect your colleagues, or do the right thing? Isaiah says, "I don't need you to be perfect. I need you to remember that the law was not created to serve the powerful. It was created to protect the weak. If you ever forget that, quit." Camilla Rhodes runs justice dialogues in police departments. Each session, 3 officers are invited to sit down with 3 citizens who have been victims of discrimination. At first, no one dares to speak, no one wants to confront, but by the 3rd session, an Irish officer named Patrick O'Neill was moved to tears as a single mother recounted how her son was handcuffed while simply riding his bike through the park after school. "I didn't think he would be so much like my son," he said. Another small incident happened in a riverside town. An old policeman, who had served for nearly 40 years, resigned himself along with a handwritten note. "I thought I served right. But now I know I closed my eyes. I am leaving so as not to prevent the next generation from opening their eyes." Isaiah watched these things happen silently. He didn't call it a success. He didn't call it a victory. He just repeated the same old saying every time someone asked, "I was just the one who dropped the first stone into the lake. As for the waves, they are all thanks to you. It started with anonymous text messages. No return address, no phone number, just a simple cold line. Shut up, or your daughter will learn the hard way. The message arrived on Isaiah's phone at 3:12 a.m. He read it in the dim light of an old nightlight, his eyes still calm, but his hands clenched. Tight. Kyle Sanders received a package. Inside was a photo of him and his mother walking to the grocery store. From behind. Clear. Along with it was a note. You chose the wrong side. Watch your step. He immediately reported it to Lieutenant Camila Rhodes. She was thoughtful. Said nothing. But the next day, she personally arranged for Kyle's family to move temporarily. No one was told. No paperwork was made. Then Camila did. One night when she returned home late, she found the mailbox by her front door open. Inside was a leather bag, and inside were an unfired bullet, a piece of her old police uniform, the kind she had worn when she first joined the force. A line in block letters, scrawled in red ink. Again, you will not get away. The situation was getting serious. Isaiah called an emergency meeting of his legal team, elected representatives, and the group of law students. He stood at the head of the table, his eyes scanning each of them. We have touched the rotten core of the system. And that core, it will not be exposed easily. A young female lawyer asked, Should we step back? Let the public cool down? Isaiah shook his head. We can't retreat when evil speaks. Because if we stay silent today, there will be no one to speak for us tomorrow. And then the worst happened. Isaiah's daughter, Alyssa Walker, a kindergarten teacher, was hit by an unknown SUV on the highway. She lost control of the car, crashed into a guardrail, and flipped over. She suffered minor injuries, not life-threatening. But her daughter, Layla, just 6 years old, suffered a head injury and was hospitalized in a temporary coma. Isaiah was in the emergency room when he got the call. He sat by Layla's bed, holding her tiny hand, and for the first time since the traffic stop, he cried. Not out of fear, out of guilt. I should have protected her. I should have known they would hit her where it hurt. The media found out. But strangely, none of the major news outlets reported it. A trusted journalist called Isaiah privately. We were forced to take down the story. They said it was an unknown accident, but everyone knew. That was the message. Camila met privately with the FBI. An internal investigation revealed that a group of retired officers who had worked under Rick Mallory had financial ties to an illegal private security firm. The firm provided surveillance, warning, and light intervention services. That service, in this case, was the start of a sophisticated campaign of intimidation against Isaiah, Kyle, Camila, and their families. The FBI offered to put Isaiah and his family in witness protection. He refused. I'm not going to hide because I'm doing the right thing. We've spent too many years in the shadows. I'm not going to help them pull the curtain back. Instead, he held a public press conference. He appeared with Kyle, Camila, and their lawyers in a closed room, live on television. On air, he looked straight into the camera. Last week, my niece almost died because of people who are afraid of the truth. But I will not back down. If you want to scare me, know this. I have nothing left to lose. But I have thousands of people behind me, and they have never been afraid of the dark like you. The room held its breath. A reporter stood up and asked, Do you think you will be safe after today? Isaiah answered, eyes unblinking. I don't think about safety. I think about why I am alive. And I think I was born to say this, no matter the cost. One mid-June morning, under a soft summer sun, Isaiah stood silently in front of the Mississippi State Capitol. No cameras, no reporters, just him, and a stack of papers he'd held in his hands for the past 18 months. The file was thick and heavy, and simply titled The Walker Act. Inside were all the things he'd dreamed of, or independent oversight of every police department. Mandatory disclosure of race-based traffic check data, legal protections for whistleblowers, and most important, formal compensation for those wrongfully imprisoned or framed by abuses of power. The meeting that passed the bill was unusually quiet. No one spoke at length. No one shouted in protest. Because everyone knew that anyone who objected now would have to look directly into the eyes of hundreds of thousands of people watching live television. When the gavel fell a third time, The Walker Act is hereby passed. Isaiah did not applaud. He did not shed a tear. He simply nodded, as if he had seen it all along, in an old dream. A few days later, a small bronze statue was erected in the park in front of the Greenville City Hall. Not a portrait of Isaiah, not a scene of him speaking, just a hand resting gently on the shoulder of a trembling child. At the base of the statue were the words, "Silence casts darkness, truth lights the way." No one said who erected it, but people came to lay flowers every day. In high schools from Biloxi to Jackson, civics classes began with a video clip from Isaiah's first hearing. Law students used Walker v. Mississippi as a real-life example of abuse of power and the process of restitution. The University of Mississippi established a scholarship named after Isaiah's niece, Layla Walker, for students who want to pursue criminal justice reform. Kyle Sanders was promoted to head of the new recruit training team. In every entry-level class, he recounted the story of that year, not to brag, but to remind. A single brick, if not fixed, will bring down the whole wall. Being a police officer is not about keeping quiet for the sake of your colleagues. It's about speaking up for justice, even if it means being alone. Camilla Rhodes turned down all offers for higher positions. She retired on her 30th anniversary. At her farewell, she said only one thing. "I'm not proud of being a commander. I'm proud of stopping, listening, and changing." And Isaiah? He didn't start an organization. He didn't run for office. He quietly wrote books. He taught small seminars again, and walks every afternoon with little Layla, now healthy, smart, and full of questions. "Grandpa, why aren't you angry at the people who hurt you?" Isaiah leans down and strokes his granddaughter's hair. "Because anger only keeps you in the past. You want me to live in the future. But not everything is smooth sailing. There are still anonymous letters. There are still strange looks from some corners. But unlike before, now, Isaiah is no longer alone. He has community. He has laws. He has truth protected. And most importantly, he has faith that there will be people who will continue to light that fire." A year later, at the graduation ceremony of the State Police Academy, the female valedictorian stepped up to the podium to speak. She saluted and said, "My name is Noelle Avery, and I was the victim of a cheating test when I was 16. I stand here today, not for revenge, but to be the reason that a child doesn't have to live in fear like I did." The entire auditorium stood and applauded. In the back row, Isaiah sat quietly, holding his old cane. He smiled. That's enough, he thought. Enough for one life. You just heard the story of Isaiah Walker, a black man who was almost thrown into prison by those who wore the badge of the law. And what outrages us most is not just how he was treated, but that this brutality has happened thousands of times and has been buried in silence. If that day the phone hadn't recorded it, if Kyle Sanders hadn't spoken up, if Isaiah hadn't had the courage to stand up and scream into the silence that's suffocating millions of people, today we wouldn't have a Walker Act. We wouldn't have classes in justice. We wouldn't have a vivid lesson from a man who was pulled out of a car like a criminal just because he was black. The question is, how many more people must be pulled out of cars before this society opens its eyes? How many more kids like Layla in the hospital? How many bullets, how many threats, how many anonymous letters, before someone says, enough? You see, Isaiah is not a superhero. He is not rich. He does not have an army. The only thing he has is the truth, and an unshakable belief, and that is what forced a system to change. And what about you? Do you dare to speak up when someone is being abused on the street? Do you dare to question an unjust decision in the classroom, at work, or at any checkpoint? Do you dare to keep your eyes open, as Kyle did, when faced with wrongdoing, power, and threats from your co-workers? The lesson here is not just about fighting to survive. It is about fighting to live with value. Isaiah does not teach us how to win a battle. He teaches us not to give up, not even with one breath left. If this story moves you, if it makes you angry, and above all, makes you believe that justice is not a distant dream, like this video to support Isaiah Walker, a man who refuses to back down from the darkness, leave a comment to motivate those who dare to speak the truth. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, Because there are many stories like this, voices that have been silenced, people who have quietly walked through injustice, waiting to be told. Be part of the change. Start by not ignoring stories like this. Thank you for watching until the end. We believe the truth doesn't need permission to exist. It just needs someone brave enough to tell it.